So tonight's talk is one of those ones that is going to be fairly straightforward academically. But it's probably going to hit you maybe harder than you thought. So just give you a heads up about that. And here's why. If you've begun to understand a couple things about complex trauma or complex PTSD, is that there's really two things that a child can't resolve. So the first thing is they have these needs, need for love, for nurture, for acceptance, for validation, all of that, and it's not getting met consistently. And they try to get it met and it's still not being met. And that unmet need is very painful for them. It's frustrating, it's hard. So an unresolved need then causes the child to feel all alone. Nobody cares for me. It must be my fault. I don't feel safe. And that's complex trauma. The second thing is unresolved pain, unresolved danger. And so again, the child tries to get the danger out of the way, tries to get resolved the painful emotion, and they can't. And so after a while, it's like, what do I do? What do I do? I can't resolve this pain. And so two unresolved things really cause a child to feel all alone, must be my fault, unsafe, and that is ongoing trauma. So what that leads to, and here's what we're going to focus on tonight, is when a child has an unmet need or has unresolved pain, they will then adapt. And that's the key word for tonight, is a child adapts. So trauma is all about adapting in order to try and get your needs met or in order to try to take the pain away. So it's adapt, adapt, adapt. Adapt in order to survive is really what we're talking about when it comes to ongoing trauma. So if I stay the way I am, I'm going to have ongoing pain that's never going to go away. I'm going to have unmet needs that are never going to get met. So I better be the one that changes. So it's adapt, adapt. But to do that, and here's the painful part we're going to look into tonight, the child has to murder their own soul. So to survive physically, I got to kill parts of me internally in order to get rid of the pain, in order to survive. And that I'm going to give you 11 different parts of us the child has to basically murder in order to survive. And that's where for many people this gets painful, because when you begin to look at that, it's like, wow, to survive physically I did basically destroy myself in a bunch of different ways. And that is not fun to look at, but it's the reality, the sad reality of trauma. So let's start with the unmet needs part. So we've talked about the 12 needs before. So the need for love, the child comes in with this great drive and need to be authentic, to be respected and valued, to be safe, to be accepted, to fit in and belong, to be around people who regulate their emotions well, to get validated. So in a healthy home, what happens when a child's need is not met? So think of their need for food. They are hungry, so they cry. So they become dysregulated once that need is not met, because they are in a certain amount of pain because of an unmet need. So they are dysregulated, they cry, or they're a bit older, they ask for the need to be met. They put themselves out there and say, could I have this? Could you meet this need? Healthy parents come right in and they meet the need, and as soon as the need is met, the child becomes regulated, the child becomes happy, everything is good, it's resolved. That need is gone, it is resolved. And so that is the way it's supposed to be. That's the way it's designed when a child has an unmet need. But what happens when a child has an unmet need? They cry out, they ask for it, and it doesn't get met. And rather, instead of getting met, they might even get punished for crying or for asking for it. They might get told they're selfish. They might get told to suck it up. They might get more pain added to the existing pain. So what does the child then do? Because this need is not getting met. They go, it must be my fault. I need to be the one that changes so that mom and dad will meet my need. So I will adapt. So what then does a child do? They wear masks. They adopt roles. And we talked about this very briefly, but let me give them the main roles that children will adapt when their needs aren't being met to try to get their needs met. So the first one is a child who says, I will become a hero. I will become the perfect child. And so I will take care of everybody's needs. I will be super responsible. I'll get straight A's at school. I will excel at everything. And their whole focus becomes doing everything perfectly. Pleasing mom and dad, being the super people pleaser. And so they do all of that. That's their adaptation. And the hope is if I adapt this way, then mom and dad are going to say, oh, that's a good kid. I will meet their needs. And they will get their needs met. Some children, they go, that's too much work. I'm going to just be funny. I'm going to be the entertainer, the mascot. I'm going to keep everybody laughing and get everybody to like me because I tell jokes constantly. I'm constantly telling wonderful stories. And so when everybody likes me so much, they're just going to want to meet my needs. So they adapt. Now, just think about what happens to that hero child who does everything perfectly, super excels at everything. What happens when they become an adult? So that worked maybe for them as a kid. It got their needs kind of met. But then they become an adult and they think they still got to be perfect. They got to excel at everything. They burn themselves out. They soon have a resentment towards everybody and everything because everybody always wants something and they have to please everybody and they don't know how to say no, and it wears them right out. What happens to that mascot comedian once they become an adult? They don't know how to have healthy relationships. How do you get serious? How do you open up? How do you become vulnerable? You got to be funny all the time. And so it backfires. So it seemed to work as a child, so that adaptation becomes a maladaptation, is what I want you to see in adult life. The other thing that some children did, the other major role, is to become an invisible child or a lost child, it gets called. And what that means is, okay, maybe I'm too needy. Maybe I should just not have needs. I will never ask for anything. I will cut myself off and just stay by myself all the time so nobody notices me. That way I'll never cause a problem. That way I'll never get mom and dad upset. I will become as small as I can. And that's their adaptation. Once they become an adult, they don't know how to ask for their needs. They don't know how to have a relationship. And so it becomes a maladaptation again. But the next thing I want you to understand about these adaptations is they had to change who they really were and become something else. They had to play a role. They had to wear a mask. And so that means they became less and less who they really were. They became more and more what they thought others wanted them to be or needed them to be. And after a while, they don't even know who they really are anymore. And so they lose that sense of authentic and feel more and more like an imposter. So what happens sadly within complex trauma is some children adapt and they kind of get their needs met, but what happens deeper than that is now they have an idea that it was my fault, I really am bad, I have to always be fake to get anybody to notice me. So shame becomes the driving force. Secondly, love has to be earned. There's no such thing as unconditional love. Love has to be earned, and that's the bottom line. So the two very key things, their identity and love, get distorted because of that. But for some, the other tragedy becomes this: they adapt and their needs still don't get met. They adapt again and they get their hopes up. Maybe my needs will get met again, and they still don't get met. They adapt again, and they adapt over years and years, multiple ways, and their needs still don't get met. So what we have seen is right around 12, 13, if they've adapted, needs still aren't met, they shut her down. They harden themselves. They go, screw this. Screw trying to please people. Screw trying to earn love. I don't need anybody. And they turn anger, they turn into self-pity, they turn into blaming everybody. And that becomes their way of life. And so that's where some turn to drugs to start just medicating and helping them stay shut down. So they don't have to feel, they don't have to connect with anybody, because any adaptation, which is a desire to connect to get your needs met, always results in pain and rejection. So screw it all. Others, they will adapt and they will find an adaptation that seems to get their needs met. So let's say a girl comes into her teens and she finds out that everybody thinks she's drop dead gorgeous. And everybody gives her attention. People want to buy her stuff. Guys want to take her out. People do stuff for her. And she goes, if I flirt and stay beautiful, I will get my needs met. And that becomes her mentality, is thinking, this is the way to get my needs met, but I ought to always perform in this area. And so all kinds of people find one thing that seems to get their needs met, but what you can begin to realize, it doesn't really get their needs met. It just seems to work for a little while and causes problems later in life. So here's a very quick test for you that you can do on yourself. So I'm going to quickly go through a bunch of these needs. See if you can quickly in your mind, if you had to do an adaptation as a child to get this need met. Okay? So for safety, if some of you didn't feel safe, what did you have to do to feel safe? So for some of you, you just never spent time at home. You just were always somewhere else playing. Others, you became super angry or super tough. So you adapted to try to find safety because you weren't safe just as you were. Connection. You tried to connect with dad. You tried to connect with mom. They were too busy. They were angry. They once in a while connected, but not consistently. They weren't attuned to you, but you're desperate to connect. So how did you adapt? Maybe you tried to do chores for them. Maybe you tried to be funny. Maybe you tried to do some type of thing that gave feelings of connection. If I play sports with dad, even though I hate sports, he is all of a sudden proud of me and wants to spend time with me. So those, what did you do to adapt? And then some kids just never were understood. The parents said, you need to hear what I have to say. They never cared what you had to say. And you need to do it my way. They didn't care about hearing your opinion. So some people who never felt understood, and that's a massive need, they adapted by, I'll become super smart. Then everybody will listen to me. Or I will talk nonstop in every situation and I'll over-explain everything. Then people will listen to me. An adaptation. So how are you doing? So then you go to validation, feeling loved, all of those needs. Did you do adaptations? Being authentic, if that wasn't allowed to you, how did you adapt? Growing control. So a baby is totally dependent and parents are in total control. But as they get older, parents give them more and more freedom to make decisions. So first they can dress themselves, then they can decide what game they want to play, etc. And they get more and more autonomy as they grow older, so that by the time they leave home, they're able to make decisions well for themselves. But what happens with a parent who doesn't let a child develop that growing autonomy, but is afraid a child might make a bad mistake, and so they super hyper control everything about that child? Well, that child begins to rebel to get some space to be a child, to allow themselves to grow up. But what happens once they start to rebel? The parent says, no, you're not going to rebel, and they tighten control. And then the child rebels even more, trying to get some space to grow up. And the parent tightens control even more. And so then what comes out of that is what is now diagnosed as oppositional defiance disorder. And that is, whatever you say to do, I'm going to do the opposite. Just because you said to do this, I would do the opposite. And so that adaptation is their only way to try to allow themselves to grow up. Some who are never given ability to make decisions, their way of trying to gain some control is OCD, obsessive compulsive. I'll just go organize my little world over and over again because that gives me a feeling of control. And so that can become an issue for some. If you weren't allowed boundaries, mom just barged into your room, read your diary, people were always in your business and didn't give you any space, then for some people, they adapted by, I will isolate, or I will use anger to keep people away. Because nobody listens to my no. So the only way I can set a boundary is to adapt in those ways. So again, you can see that adaptation when you get to adult life. If you're angry all the time, or if you isolate because you don't know how to say no, it's not going to work for healthy relationships. So those adaptations. And then all of the emotions, if you weren't able to resolve fear or anger or depression or grief or hurt or false guilt or stress, how did you adapt? So that's something you can just do, or even discuss it with somebody you're close to and compare notes on that. I think you'll find it informative. But here's the sad part. That adaptation, complex trauma, you had to do it over and over and over again because your situation didn't improve. And so because you did it over and over again, it then became part of your subconscious programming in your brain. It became your way of operating, your default setting in your brain. So now as you get to adult life, it becomes the program your brain normally wants to operate by. And it's now maladaptive, and it messes you up. And so again, to survive, the child only had the option of adapting. But those adaptations, sadly, today are messing up life. And that is, to me, one of the sad tragedies of complex trauma. Okay, so let's go to this unresolved pain, the need to survive in a dangerous environment. And we're going to get into this adaptation of having to start to shut down the internal part of me. So in order to keep safe physically, I had to shut down emotions. I had to shut down internal stuff, all to stay safe physically. So another way to look at this is, if you look at a child, the beauty of a child is they just come into the world as they are, and they show up authentic, who they are, their personality. And if you look at those basic instincts to open up, to be vulnerable, to love, to share, all of those things, you go, those are beautiful instincts. And they show all of their emotions, their happiness, their sadness, their grief, it all is shown. But what we're going to see is they had to start shutting down all of that basic, authentic, beautiful instinct and try to become less human. And so complex trauma takes a child who's fully human and forces them to become less human to survive physically. So there's a quote by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's one of the leading researchers on trauma. If you ever want to read his stuff, it's really good. But complex trauma is not just about being stuck in the past. It's also about not being fully alive in the present, because you're not fully human. So you exist, but you don't fully live. That's what happens with trauma. You exist, but you don't thrive. So a book was written called Soul Murder. And basically, that's what I'm going to develop. It's a strong term, and I use it on purpose because, to me, it's exactly what the child had to do to survive. They had to murder parts of their soul. And so I don't say it to be offensive or strong. It's just to really put in the focus with clarity what happens internally inside of a child. So here's the 11 things a child had to do, had to shut down, had to murder in their soul in order to survive physically. So number one is they had to shut down their alarm system. So there's 3 parts to our alarm system. So if you think about it, it'll make sense once I explain it. So number one, we have a gut feeling. So I don't know if you've ever walked up to somebody and something in your gut just said, danger, danger, something's not right here. You sense something. So you can call it your spidey sense, your internal alarm system, red flags. It's your gut. So picture any child, they have an amazing gut. I love watching little children sometimes when they meet a stranger, and they'll go to one person without blinking an eye, and another one they'll back away from. And you go, what in the world is going on that they pick that up? But they do. There's something that senses if a person is safe. So imagine a child growing up in a complex trauma family, and they have an uncle that's a sexual predator, and they, as a little child, they just don't feel safe around this uncle. They don't like this uncle. They avoid this uncle, and they tell mom and dad they don't want to be around this uncle. They're listening to their gut. And mom and dad go, your uncle's wonderful. He's so much fun. And they force the child to spend time with the uncle. And the child cries and gets upset, but the parents don't listen, so the child can't resolve the problem by listening to their gut. They get forced to their uncle, and then they get sexually abused. So that's, I've heard hundreds and hundreds of stories like that. Or let's say a child is out with friends, and all of a sudden they want to do something that's picking on another kid. And their gut says, no, don't go there. Don't go do that. That would hurt that boy's feelings. And they back away. But then they realize, if I do that, they're going to laugh at me. I won't be part of the group anymore. I'll ignore my gut, and I'll do just so I fit in. So what happens in complex trauma is when that child gets forced to go with the uncle, when you ignore your gut, eventually you go, I'm tired of feeling my gut bothering me all the time, and I can't do anything about it. So I'm going to just shut my gut down. I don't want to hear from it. I don't want any alarms going off, because I can't do anything about it. So what's the point of having it? So they find a way to harden themselves to their alarm system of their gut. And so that's why for people coming out of complex trauma, they walk back into a relationship where they get abused. And they repeat the trauma. Why? Because when they met the person, if they didn't have their trauma, they would have had their gut saying, danger, danger, don't go with that person. But they've shut their gut down a long time ago. And they just go with that person and they get traumatized again. And so it's one of the tragedies. So that's the first alarm system, is our gut. The second one is our conscience. So what happens sadly within complex trauma is that you have to lie in order to survive. You don't care about the morals of lying or not lying. You care about surviving. And so if you're going to get punished for doing something right, and you're going to get punished for doing good stuff, well, you're going to lie about stuff just so you don't get punished. So you learn to lie to avoid getting hurt. Well, then your conscience starts bugging you. Well, I don't want to listen to that conscience because I got to lie. So let's shut my conscience down. Because it's doing me no good. It's not helping me survive. It's adding to my pain. And so you shut down your conscience. You harden yourself to your conscience. So there's your second alarm system that you've shut down. And then the third one is your emotions. So one of the reasons your emotions are given to us is to give us sensations about what's happening in our external world. So if I'm in a dangerous situation, what emotion comes? Fear. And fear gives me sensations that say, get out of there. So emotions are designed to be this alarm system that alerts us to our external environment and what is happening in it. But let's say you grow up and you are being treated unjustly every day by dad. You are angry about it, but nobody cares, and you get punished for being angry. And then you're afraid all the time, but nobody is fixing your situation, but they punish you for being afraid. And then you're crying because you're so upset, and then you get punished for crying. That's a bunch of negative emotions that you're trying to resolve that only end up in more pain. And you can't resolve those negative emotions. So what does your brain say? Emotions are stupid. Who needs emotions? Let's shut down emotions, stuff emotions, disconnect from emotions, because emotions are no good. They don't help at all, because you can never resolve them, and they only result in more pain. So all three alarm systems got shut down. And now you go into adult life without any alarm system. And the other part to the emotions that causes people to shut it down is that when you are surviving in survival mode, you can't show weakness. Because if you show weakness, somebody's going to take advantage of you, somebody's going to hurt you. And so you begin to go through, what makes me weak? Oh, vulnerability, crying, showing fear, showing soft emotions. Oh, yeah, there's another reason why emotions are bad. Let's shut them down. And so that's just number one. But do you realize how much damage got done just by number one being shut down? All the alarm systems. So now you go into adult life vulnerable to getting re-traumatized because you have no alarm systems to warn you. The second thing is the authenticity. And this one to me is so sad. So a child comes into the world, like I said, naturally authentic. They're just themselves. They're real. But they have a second desire, a second competing drive, and that is to connect. Right from birth, the child wants to connect with mom, with dad. Connection is just built into us with great power. So what happens if you go to connect with mom or dad and you get rejected? The child concludes, it must be my fault, so it must be because I'm the way I am. Being authentic is the reason why I was rejected. So authenticity does not lead to connection like I thought it would. Authenticity leads to lack of connection, to rejection. Therefore, if I want connection, and that's the stronger of the drives, I must kill my authenticity. And I must become something different. And that's where the mass and the roles come in. So one of the very first things to get murdered within a child is authenticity with complex trauma. Now, here's how it often happens. It's a little at a time. It's not all at once. So I've had many clients recount to me in detail where they were told from an early age, get a smile on your face. And if you don't get a smile on your face soon, I'm going to give you something to cry about. And that was what they heard. And so it was basically, you got to have only one emotion, be happy all the time. And so they hated themselves that they were so sensitive. They hated themselves that they cried a lot. So they just, I just wish I could cut that part of myself out and throw it away, because I hate that part of myself. So they murdered that part of themselves. And then they got made fun of because they were so shy and introverted. Because everybody in their family said, the only fun people in the world are extroverts. Introverts are boring. And they go, I hate that I'm an introvert. And they murdered that part, and they tried to be an extrovert. And then they got in trouble because they were angry so much. And I hate that I'm such an angry person. And they murder that part of themselves. And so what they begin to do is murder piece by piece whatever got the latest rejection, until they were less and less human. And that is massive for many people. So the next one ties in with what we just said, is that connection, but it goes deeper than that, and it's intimacy. So if you think of healthy, authenticity equals connection. Complex trauma, authenticity equals no connection. Wow, okay. So I still want connection, but nobody that's significant in my life seems to be available to connect with me. So I conclude it's my fault. I get hurt, but if that continues to happen, I get to the point where I go, who needs connection? I can just survive on my own. Who needs close relationships? I will have sexual relationships. I will have fun relationships. I will have relationships that got lots of warm feelings of feeling in love, but I'm not going to open up, and I'm not going to truly connect at a deep level, because that's no way. So what they basically say is intimacy, true intimacy, is off the table. It's not necessary. I'm not going to allow it. And that goes even further, is if I'm the screw up that nobody wants to connect with, I don't even want intimacy with myself. So they kill connecting to themselves. They kill connecting truly with others. And it's like every relationship now is gone that has any depth and meaning. And that is such a huge, huge loss. Number 4, told you this could get heavy, trust. So a child comes into the world totally dependent, totally needing people who have strength and power, who care for them to take care of them. So they come into the world naturally trusting individuals. They totally trust, naturally. They don't have to be taught how to trust. If you put a little child on the roof and say jump, they jump because they trust dad's gonna catch me. That is just built into them. But what happens if the child's on the roof and dad says jump and the child jumps and dad doesn't catch them? Well, they go, must have been my fault. So dad puts them back on the roof and says, I'll get you this time, jump, and dad doesn't catch them again. They go, well, really must have been my fault. I need to do something different. But play that out. That every time they trust somebody, they get let down. They trust again, they get let down. They think it's their fault, they get their hopes up, they trust again, they get let down. They get to a point where they go, not trusting another human being in my life. Even if it was Jesus saying jump off the roof, nope, not a hope. Because trust equals pain. Trust equals getting hurt. So trust is now murdered from my soul. What is one of the foundations for a healthy, intimate relationship? Well, you got to be authentic, you got to connect at an intimate level, and you got to trust. What has been murdered in complex trauma? Authenticity, intimacy, connection, and trust. The 3 main foundation blocks of healthy adult relationships. Truth. So we already talked about that in many complex trauma homes, kids have to lie to avoid getting hurt, to avoid getting punished. So lies become absolutely necessary for them to survive. And if you want to just think of a kind of a modern example of that, you can think of the times of World War II with Hitler, where Hitler's wanting to wipe out Jews, and people are saying, no, I'm going to hide Jews. Well, all of a sudden, you've got to tell lies in order to save these people. And so lies become necessary in environments where people are violating love as a way of life. And so lies become part of that, but it goes further. Many complex trauma families, there's all kinds of issues. Dad's angry all the time. There's disrespect happening. There's lots of hurtful things being said. There's betrayal. There's lack of justice. But nobody will talk about it. And so if a child tries to say, hey, that wasn't fair, or can we talk about this? Nobody. And then there's secrets. Well, dad did this, but don't tell anybody. Well, mom's this way, but don't tell everybody. She can't go to work because she's so drunk. Secret, secret, secret. And so what's happening in complex trauma is a child is constantly being told the truth, don't go there. We live in lies. And we learn to tell lies, we learn to believe lies, and we learn to keep secrets. So what happens for many kids is then in their internal world to tell the truth to themselves. My family's screwed up, my dad doesn't love me, my mom's too busy for me. That's too painful. So who even wants to tell the truth to themselves? So they start lying to themselves and escape to a fantasy world of make-believe. So the truth gets killed over and over in many different ways. And that's why somebody said the greatest sources of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves. So truth becomes sacrificed. And that's why one of the characteristics of complex trauma is even in adult life, many continue to lie when it would have been just as easy to tell the truth. Then the next one is needs. And so I've already kind of explained this a bit, but let me just take it further. What happens for many children when your needs aren't met repeatedly and repeatedly is you begin to say, I will not have needs. My life will be about serving others. And so I will just do without. I will sacrifice, give up my needs, put my needs aside, and just take care of others, thinking that that's going to make them happy. Now, there's a wee bit of truth in that, but it's got to be in balance. And so, for many people, they try to live repeatedly by denying their own needs. And it is so sad because there's just an emptiness inside, there's a pain inside, there's a constant discontent that's deep down inside that's always there. But then when they get to adult life, what they find is they can walk into a room and they can be attuned to everybody else's needs in the room. They just don't have a clue what their own needs are, because they've never taken stock and listened to themselves to learn what their own needs are. And it is a huge loss for them, and for many, it takes a long time to relearn that. The next one doesn't happen with everybody. This comes out of more severe trauma, but is you have to kill empathy to survive, because empathy is a sign of weakness. Empathy people will take advantage of. Empathy people will use you and manipulate you and hurt you if you have empathy. And so a common thing that we look for in troubled children is, are they destructive of property, and do they harm animals? And those are two major signs that empathy has been killed. They just don't care about anybody else or anything else. Now, for many in complex trauma, they don't have empathy towards humans, because humans have only hurt them, but they have loads of empathy towards animals, because animals have always been there for them. But in more severe trauma, they even lose the empathy to animals, and they start to harm animals. And so that is a huge loss, because what replaces that is just a bitterness, a hatred, a deep anger that's there all the time, and it just makes for impossible, healthy relationships. Next one, creativity. Don't know if you have thought of this one. When you are, just picture yourself in a war zone in a gangland neighborhood. You don't got time to sit and go, what am I going to do with my spare time today? Maybe I should take up a new hobby. No, you're going, is anybody going to shoot me today? Who's going to be on the corner? Are they going to bully me today? Your brain is focused totally on, have I thought everything through enough so I can survive? So creativity gets sacrificed when you're in survival mode. And so you don't have time to explore hobbies. You don't have time to just relax and do whatever you feel like doing. For some people, they think, well, I didn't lose creativity. I went into fantasy world. That's not necessarily creativity. That's, for them, that was an escape from the real world. And they didn't develop their skills and their assets. So creativity usually gets sacrificed. And then for many, spirituality. And so I've heard, again, hundreds and hundreds of these stories where dad was a violent drunk and they prayed, or somebody was sexually abusing them and they prayed, begging God to help them to stop it, and it doesn't. And eventually they go, screw that. I'm done with it. And that has to get killed to survive, because if they were to allow that to continue, it would keep them hoping that maybe something will improve. And it's like, no, that's too painful. So let's kill that. And then the hope. So again, the child that adapted got their hopes up that my needs are going to get met, I'm going to be safe. Didn't happen. Adapt again. Get their hopes up. Going to get my needs met, going to be safe. Didn't happen. A child has an amazing capacity to adapt and keep hoping. And they will do that for years and years, but eventually they go, there's two problems here. I get hurt every time, and my hopes get dashed every time. And my hopes getting dashed is just as painful as getting hurt. So you know what? I'm going to stop hoping ever. Never get your hopes up, because you'll just get disappointed. So you kill hope in your life. So now what do you do when you get to adult life and you get into a good job or a good relationship with a healthy person and things are going well? Do I get my hopes up? No way. Let's sabotage this relationship. Let's sabotage this job, because I know how to deal with that. I don't know how to deal with getting my hopes up. So hope gets destroyed. And then the final one, for many, sadly, they had to kill all their dreams. So part of childhood is, I want to be a policeman, I want to be a soldier, I want to be a fireman, and you dream and you dream. In complex trauma, every opportunity slowly gets taken away and your dreams die. And you have to stop dreaming because it hurts too much to have your dreams die. So those are the 11 things that sadly a child has to kill within themselves in order to survive. But sadly, we're not done, because there's some collateral damage. So you know what happened as you killed all those things? You become less human, but that means you lose your innocence. And what does complex trauma do? It takes away a child's innocence. And that's huge collateral damage. But then, because you think everything's your fault, and you're constantly adapting and you don't know who you are, you get more insecure, you lose your confidence. That's a huge collateral damage. You go from living a full life of joy, enjoying, having all your needs met, to just existing. And existing is not joy. But that's collateral damage. So joy and peace is gone, because now you're in constant emotional pain, constant need, constant hurt. Joy and peace, collateral damage. Your sense of value is gone because you're not loved and your needs aren't met just because you're you. You have to try to earn everything, and your needs still aren't being met, so you go, I must be truly of no value. Shame is a huge thing. And then with that, because you have to do things to survive that you know you shouldn't be doing, more and more you lose your self-respect. And that becomes collateral damage. And then for many people, what comes out of that is you try and try, you adapt and adapt, and it doesn't work, and you feel helpless to change your situation. You are truly a victim of unfortunate situation that you cannot fix, and that helpless feeling can now go into adult life where you go, I can't do anything to better my life. I feel still helpless. I still feel like a victim. And that is a massive issue, collateral damage. And then you go from not just rebelling against your parents and not trusting them, you go to, I don't trust any authority. I don't want to follow any authority because every authority has let me down. And so now that's collateral damage. So that's a lot of stuff. Okay, so let me very quickly go, how do we heal from this? So what I hope you realize is that recovery from trauma is a very slow, gradual process of becoming human again. It's breathing life back into my emotions. It's retraining my alarm systems and my gut. It's learning to trust again, learning to connect again, learning to be authentic again. You don't do that overnight. When all of your messages say, don't go there because you're going to get hurt again, that's a very gradual, slow process. But it's the process of becoming human again. Because you had to become less human to survive. But then, secondly, it's saying, I can no longer be a victim. I am not helpless. I now have tools. I now have support. I now must learn how to meet my needs, stand up for myself, express my needs, and take ownership for my life. I am not that helpless child anymore. That is a very important but challenging step for many. And so that involves, I need to learn how to manage my emotions. I need to learn how to think and concentrate and plan. I need to learn how to deal with my triggers that are going to come up. I need to learn how to connect and learn how to find joy and peace in my life. I have to start being honest with myself and connecting with myself. I have to stand up for myself and take responsibility. So there's a ton of more stuff we can cover in this. I just really wanted you to kind of get the picture that this trauma thing, we've looked at how it affects our immune system, how it affects our central nervous system, how it affects our brain, our bodies. But tonight was how it affects your soul. And that is part of this slow process of healing. So I hope that helps you understand it. I'm going to have Karen come back and sing a couple songs, and then I'll come back for the Christian part. Or we're first going to take a break, sorry. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then Karen's going to sing us back in 10 minutes. Then we're going to have the Christian part. If that part doesn't interest you, you can leave now. That's not a problem to me at all. Nobody will be offended. But if you want to come and check that part out, be back here in 10 minutes. Thanks. We're doing, in this section, looking at complex trauma in the Bible, though it's never mentioned there. It's just we see it especially when Israel came out of slavery. So they had spent generations of being slaves and traumatized by all of the violence and brutality they experienced. And so when we see them come out of slavery and then head towards the land God promised them, there's that 40-year period of them traveling. And what we see that in their behavior in those 40 years, you go, that's trauma, that's trauma, that's trauma. Okay, they got trauma stuff. And so that's what I've been walking you through in this Christian part. And so what we've seen so far is, last time we looked at if anybody's going to make it in recovery, they got to learn to trust. We talked about that in the first part and how trust gets murdered. And so God basically starts trying to teach them that they can trust him. And whoa, they don't like that. That is not a fun learning class for them. And then the second thing, God brought them to this place where the water was bitter. And it was called Marah. And then God heals the water, but he says, I'm the God that heals you. He doesn't say, I'm the God that healed the water. And what he was doing is saying, this water is a metaphor for you. You thought slavery was your problem, and now that you're out of slavery, you thought everything's going to be great. No, you're bitter. You're the problem. You need to get sweetened. You need to get changed. And so God basically said, I'm going to start working on you, the bitter water. They didn't like that either. Now, tonight we come to the next part, and that is that learning to live a healthy life is going to take a lot of fights and a lot of work. And we don't like that part very much. We just want God to magically put us in the promised land where everything's perfect. So I got to tell you, when I first started 20 years ago, the lady that trained me was a godly Christian woman, and she had worked in this field for 25 years. And really, though nobody hardly knows her name, she really led the way in starting in Canada to understand complex trauma. But when I started, she said to me, Tim, you're going to have 2 clients that are going to be super frustrating. One is children who came from homes where they were spoiled because they just think life owes them an easy life. And they're not used to having to work for things. But secondly, Christians. And she was a godly Christian woman. And I said, why? She said, because they think God's just going to magically do it for them. And they think they don't have to work as hard as other people because they've got God. And that just makes it easy for them. And they're going to drive you crazy. And I've been doing this 20 years, and Christians drive me crazy. Because they think recovery should be easy for them than anybody else. And they don't want to accept how hard it is, how much work it takes, and the fight that's involved. So I love how the Bible presents it in Colossians 1. Here's Paul speaking. He says, that's why I work and struggle so hard. And in another translation, he says, with all my might, depending on Christ's mighty power that works in me. Now, here's what's really interesting. What Paul is saying is, here's how I live my life. 100% effort and 100% dependence. Now, that doesn't make sense to us, because how our brains work is, if I'm doing it 100%, I don't need anybody. And if I'm depending 100%, I don't need to do anything. And Paul says, no, you got to have both. It's like a paradox. You got to work 100% and trust 100%. And so just because you trust 100% doesn't mean you don't have to work as hard. He says, no, you got to work as hard. And so that is the first big lesson that God is now going to teach Israel. So they've just come out of slavery. They've gone to the waters of Marah. They've gone to the Red Sea. They've crossed that. Now they're in the desert and beginning. So let me put this another way. I have seen, when I started this, I worked in a residential treatment center where people came and lived for 2 months, and they did their treatment. And I would have clients who do so well in treatment, and then they would leave treatment, and they'd go back to their families, back to their jobs, and within a couple of weeks, they'd relapse. And it's because they were in this protective bubble where they didn't have to deal with the stresses and pressures of life. So they did really well. It was like a greenhouse. But as soon as they got taken out of the greenhouse and put back in the real world, they weren't able to handle the stresses and pressures of that world, and they just caved. And so what God does with Israel is says, okay, I gave you a little bit of time where I kind of put you in a greenhouse. Okay, now we're going out of the greenhouse into real life. So when I started React, I said, I want it to be a day program so people still have to go home and deal with life. And then they're going to have to live with those stresses and learn how to deal with them as part of what they're doing. So let me read you this story. While the people of Israel were still at Rephidim, the warriors of Amalek, so that's a nation that was near there, they attacked them. So you can imagine, you got 3 million slaves coming out of slavery. They don't have a weapon on them. They got the odd hoe, shovel, those kind of things, but they don't have one weapon on them. And they're attacked by an army. So just the panic. So Moses commanded Joshua, choose some men and go out and fight the army of Amalek for us. Tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill holding the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did what Moses had commanded and fought the army of Amalek. Meanwhile, Moses, Aaron, and Hur climbed to the top of a nearby hill. As long as Moses held up the stand in his hand, the Israelites had the advantage. But whenever he dropped his hand, the Amalekites gained the advantage. Moses' arms soon became so tired he could no longer hold them up. So Aaron and Hur found a stone and propped them up for him. Then they stood on each side holding up his hands, so his hands were steady until sunset. As a result, Joshua overwhelmed the army of Amalek in battle. After the victory, Moses built an altar there and named it Yahweh Nissi, which means the Lord is my banner. So that's a familiar story. If you grew up in Sunday school, you're familiar with it. So let me just explain it and then bring in all the complex trauma stuff. So you can imagine the Amaleks, they hear about these slaves being released, but they also hear that when the slaves were released from Egypt, the Egyptians were just begging them to leave because they had plague after plague, and now their firstborns are died. So what they did is gave them gifts, gold and gems and silver. So the slaves left wealthy. They had the wealth of Egypt. It was kind of God's way of paying them for all their years of service. So the Amalekites hear, wow, these people are loaded with gold and silver and all kinds of precious gems. Let's attack them. They have no experience in war. They have no weapons. Let's do it now before they have a chance to train. This is our chance to get rich. So in their mind, this was a great idea. Israel, panic time. They're slaves, not soldiers. They have no training. They're in strange territory. They don't know the desert, this part of the desert. And so, like Israel always did, they got mad at God. Why'd you bring us out here to kill us? We'd have been better to die in Egypt. And they grumbled and complained. They got negative. They lashed out at Moses. That's what happens for people with trauma when adversity hits. Instead of going, this is an opportunity to grow, to trust, to learn new tools, is go, who can I be mad at? And who can I lash out at? And you become negative, and you jump to the worst case scenario. That's what Israel does. It would seem that because they only won when Moses had his hand in the air, and if his hands dropped, they lost the advantage. It would seem that some people probably died that day. Now you can imagine that that caused even greater anger at God, greater anger at Moses, because some bad stuff happened. So what's going on here? What can we learn? What does God want them to learn? Number one, and this is a lesson people from complex trauma resist, and it takes a while before they accept it, but growth only happens through struggle. You can grow intellectually without struggle, but to apply those tools and learn to use them, struggle. So I used to tell clients all this time, don't think when you finish React that you finish recovery. You just taken the classes, now you're going out for the exam. And now you're going to have to apply what you learned. And that's the hard part. But that is the only way we grow. And so what God is basically doing with Israel is, this nation has been slaves for years. I need to help them develop and into a strong nation. I need to help them grow and work through their issues. How can I do that? They're going to need some adversity. It's like when you go and say, I want to get stronger. What do? You go to a gym and you put weights on a bar and you give your muscles adversity. It's the only way they'll grow. And that is what God does. But what does Israel do? They go to that victim status. Poor us, everybody, God's out to get us. And they get all feeling sorry for themselves and angry. And that's the easy place to go to when you come out of complex trauma. The second thing is there are forces in this world from family, from culture, from friends who really don't want us to succeed. They might say they do, but once you start to change, they don't really want you to succeed. And that means that growth happens not just with adversity, but with some opposition. And we don't like that. We want everybody to like us, everybody to validate us, everybody to be supportive. And sometimes we're going to have to say no to people, stand up to people, block people in our life if we're going to make it. But then the next thing in this story that is so important is they all needed each other if they're going to succeed. You couldn't win this battle all by yourself. And Joshua needed his fighters, but he also needed Moses and Aaron and Hur up there on the hill. They all played a role, and so part of what Israel had to learn is to trust each other, to come together, support each other, and help each other. And that is foreign to people coming out of trauma. The next thing that is important for people to realize is some battles you enter and you have a decisive decision and they're over quickly. Some battles drag on for hours and days, and you're exhausted, and you can hardly keep going, and you need others to kind of help you keep going. It's great to have the short battles that are over quickly. It's the long ones that take their toll that we have to be so careful of. So the big picture is battles aren't meant in this situation to be, how can I punish you and make your life cruel? Battles are, how can I help you grow? How can I train you? They're all about positive growth. But we often see battles through a negative lens. And so God is changing that. And then part of this picture that God is wanting them to see is you have to fight and give 100% effort, but you need me. And you might not be able to see how I'm working and what I'm doing, but I'm involved in little ways that you're not even aware of, but you need me. And so God is trying to train them to walk with him as they go through life, but to give it their 100%. And that is such an important thing. So let me come back to this again, that weird 200% thing that makes little sense to us, but is the way we have to live. One of the things that I've talked about quite a bit is spiritual bypassing. So when I talk to clients, I say part of the problem for clients in the West or clients that come out of spoiled, where they're spoiled as a kid, is what we call magic thinking, or looking for a magic pill, looking for an easy solution. And that is basically what magic little fix is there where I don't have to work hard, where I don't have to feel unpleasant emotions and deal with unpleasant emotions, and will keep me happy all the time and never fail. So is there some quick fix out there? And in the West, we've kind of developed a whole medical system that says, take these 3 steps, this pill, this bit of therapy, and then you'll be fixed. And so people come into trauma recovery saying, okay, where's this quick fix and a pill? And you go, well, it's going to be a long journey. And we're always looking for the quick fix. So in spiritual terms, we call it spiritual bypassing. And what that means is thinking that God will do something that'll just make this go away, make it easy, make it so I don't have to struggle, make it so everything is just magically fixed. And sadly, and it just drives me crazy, so many churches teach spiritual bypassing to people that come to them and say, just have more faith and it'll be all fixed. Or just pray more and it'll be just fixed. Now, I'm not discrediting or minimizing prayer and faith, but what is being done in the teaching about them is basically saying, just trust God and you don't have to do anything and it'll be just easy. And I go, oh, that sets so many people that I deal with up for disillusionment and hurt. So let me give you one of the spiritual bypassing verses. And we've made songs about this, and you probably can quote it, but I can quote it from the King James, since that's how I was raised. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagle. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Okay? This translation, even youths will become weak and tired, and young men will fall with exhaustion. But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will not walk and not faint. Now let me show you how this is used in spiritual bypassing. Wait on the Lord, and you're going to soar like an eagle. You'll rise above your problems. You'll just soar above them. And so many people that I work with have been taught that, and they think, okay, I'll just trust God with this problem, and I'll soar above it. And so what is being presented is the normal for a Christian should be trusting God and soaring like an eagle, and that becomes the mark of spirituality. You trust God and you soar like an eagle. Let me show you what this verse is actually saying, and it's so important to understand. So there's three pieces to this: soar like an eagle, run and not grow weary, walk and not faint. Okay? So to us, that is soar, that's the best. Run and not grow weary, that's pretty good, but it sure ain't soaring like an eagle. Walk and not faint, that's kind of not so good. So we see it as a downward, going from the ideal, what should be the normal, to, well, if you're not that spiritual, you'll have to just learn to walk and not faint. To the Hebrew mind, the way the Hebrews built their poetry, it's the exact opposite. So let me show you what the Hebrew is saying. It is saying, soaring like an eagle, that might happen once in a while, but that's not the normal. Running and not growing weary, yeah, that's going to happen once in a while, but that's not the normal. Do you want to know what the normal is? Walking, tired, but not fainting. Do you want to know what the mark of spirituality is? It's not soaring, it's walking tired and not fainting. You want to know the greatest demonstration of God's power? It's not soaring like an eagle. It's God giving you the strength to put one foot in front of the other when you're tired. That's what that verse is saying to the Hebrew mind. We've taken it and tried in our Western culture to sell everything as an advertisement to make Christianity sound really good, because if you trust God, you'll just soar like an eagle and all your problems be gone. That is lying to people. And so one of the things when I first got sick is I went back through all the stories of the Bible. And I went through the story of Moses and Joshua and David and Elijah and Jeremiah and on and on. And do you want to know what every one of them did? Walked, tired, and didn't grow faint. And God somehow kept them going. And that's where I began to go, that's what life normally is like. And then I had 3 kids and all of that. And I go, yeah, I get walk tired, wonder if you're going to be able to put one foot in front of the other. And then I had the stresses of job and sickness and health. And I go, my life with God rarely is soaring like an eagle. My life with God is learning to trust him, to walk and not grow faint. That's the measure of godliness. That's the measure of normal. That's the measure of God's power. That's the measure of spirituality. And so what God is showing Israel is, Israel, we're going to start on a journey, but I'm not going to make it easy for you. I'm going to teach you to trust me and give 100%, but most days you're going to be tired. Most days you're going to wonder if you're going to be able to get through it. And then you're going to get to the end of the day and you're going to look back and go, don't know how it happened, but somehow we got here. I guess God helped me even when I couldn't see it. And so we don't like these lessons in the West. Hard work, tired all the time, trusting but giving 100%. But that's what life is. And that's what God taught Israel. And if you can think about a person who comes out of childhood, out of a healthy home where they have a lot of healthy tools already, life is going to be difficult and challenging. But now take a person who comes out of complex trauma, who doesn't have a lot of tools, who has a autopilot that was programmed badly. They got to relearn life. They got to relearn tools. They've got triggers that pull them in all the wrong direction. Life is even more difficult. That's what Israel went through, an even more difficult life. That's the reality of it. Part of me wishes I could just make it easy, but you know what? It's usually when life is easy that we drift from what really matters, and we get ourselves in trouble. And so we somehow need enough stress and adversity to keep us focused and dependent and surrendered. So that's our lesson for tonight. Let's pray. Father, not one of these lessons Israel has enjoyed so far. It has been a classroom of university that they didn't choose, but that you chose for them. And sometimes we feel the same way. And I just pray that you would help us to accept that you do know what's best for us. And just help us to continue in trusting you. Amen. Okay, Karen's going to sing a final song, and then our evening is over. Thank you.